My family stole $93,000 for a luxury cruise while I paid their mortgage. Now they lost their house. My brother owes $113K with wages garnished. And I bought a new Audi without regrets. I'm 29 years old, work as a creative director in Chicago, and honestly, I need to tell this story. Because what my family did to me basically left me in shock for months. And there are still days when I can't believe it actually happened. I guess I should start by explaining how I got to this point, because it wasn't overnight, you know. It was like years and years of gradually giving in little by little, until one day I woke up and realized they were using me like a human ATM. I grew up in a suburb of Chicago, typical middle-class family, or so I thought. My parents were always good to me. I mean, they raised me well and all that, but for as long as I can remember, there was something that always bothered me, and that's that my younger brother Brandon, who's 25 now, was always the golden child, the kid who could do no wrong. I was the responsible one, the one who got good grades, the one who worked from age 16 at an electronics store to pay for my stuff, while Brandon could stay home, playing video games, and my parents would say things like, "Oh, let him be, he's going through a phase, he'll mature eventually." Spoiler alert, he never matured. When I finished college, things went pretty well for me, honestly. I got a job at a small but good advertising agency, and after like 3 years, I moved to where I am now, a bigger company where I'm creative director and I earn, I don't know, let's say pretty well for my age, like around $95,000 a year before taxes. Sounds good, right? Well, yeah, except that since I started earning decent money, like 5 years ago, my parents started asking me for help with things. At first it was small stuff, like, "Hey Ethan, we need $300 to fix the car," or, "Hey, we came up short this month with the mortgage, can you lend us 500?" And I'd say yes because, well, they're my parents, right? And supposedly it was a loan, but looking back, they never paid me back a single cent. The thing kept escalating over the years. First it was 300, here, 500 there. But then it became like, "Hey, can we use your credit card to buy this? We'll pay you back next week." And then they never paid me back. And I was too soft, too much like, "Oh, I don't want to cause problems. They're my family." Eventually, I got to a point where I was basically sending them $2,000 a month to help with the mortgage and household expenses because my dad had to reduce hours at his job. He works maintenance for a cleaning. And my mom never worked outside the home. And Brandon, what was Brandon doing? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. He lived in my parents' basement, was 25 years old, hadn't finished even one semester at community college, and literally spent all day playing Call of Duty and eating whatever my mom brought to his room. Every time I mentioned something about Brandon, like, "Hey, maybe he should get a job," my mom would get super defensive and say things like, "Oh, Ethan, don't be like that with your brother. He's looking for his thing. He needs time to find his path." What path? The path to the next video game level? Please. My dad was more neutral. Like, "Yeah, you're right, Ethan, but you know how your mother is. Not worth arguing." And so I'd stay quiet because I basically had no support from anyone. Fast forward to like 8 months ago. It was a normal Tuesday. I was at my office working on a campaign for a big client, and I get a call from the bank. It was a guy named Michael, super professional, and he tells me, "Mr. Ethan, we're calling because we detected an unusual transaction on your credit card, and we want to verify it's legitimate." I'm like, "Okay, what transaction?" And he says a charge of $50,000 to a travel agency in Northbrook for a Mediterranean cruise package. "Did you authorize this purchase?" I literally went blank. $50,000. I obviously hadn't authorized anything, and I told him so. Michael told me they were going to block the charge while they investigated, and that I needed to check if anyone else had access to my card. And that's when I started to feel like a pit in my stomach, because I knew, deep down, I already knew who it had been. I called my mom immediately. Didn't even let her finish saying hello. I said, "Mom, did you use my credit card to buy a cruise?" And there was a long silence, like 5 seconds that felt like 5 hours, and then she says, "Oh, Ethan, yes, we were going to tell you. It's just that you see, your dad has been very stressed with work, and Brandon also needed a vacation. Times have been tough for everyone. Can you believe it?" Brandon needed a vacation? Vacation from what? From sitting in the basement 18 hours a day? I literally couldn't process what I was hearing. I said, Mom, that's $50,000. Why didn't you ask me first? And she, with that voice she puts on when she wants to make me feel guilty, says, Well, Ethan, you make good money. We thought you could help us with this. You've always helped us. Why is it different now? That's when something in me broke. Like I really felt something physical break in my chest. I said, Mom, that's not helping. That's theft. You guys took my card without permission and spent $50,000 on a luxury cruise. Are you crazy? And she started crying, which was her usual tactic, and says, Oh, Ethan, why are you so cruel to your family? After everything we've done for you, we raised you, we gave you a home, we sent you to college, lie. I paid for college with student loans and jobs, but okay. And now that we need something, you turn your back on us. I hung up. I literally couldn't keep listening. I called the bank back and talked to Michael again and explained the whole situation. He was super understanding and told me I could dispute the charge as fraud, but that I'd have to make a formal statement and basically accuse my family of using my card without authorization. He also told me to check all my cards and accounts in case there were more charges. I hadn't noticed. And guess what? There were more. A lot more. When I sat down that night, with all my statements from the last 6 months, I found another $43,000 in charges I hadn't made. A $4,000 TV. A new laptop for $2,500. Furniture for $8,000. Designer clothes. Expensive restaurants. Electronics. A PlayStation 5 and like 20 games. Obviously for Brandon. Spa trips. Cosmetic dental treatments for my mom. It was like they had decided my card was a blank check to live a luxury life they couldn't afford. The total was like $93,000. $93,000. I was literally shaking as I added it all up. I felt nauseous. I felt rage. I felt betrayal. All together. Because it wasn't just the money, you know? It was that for years I had been sacrificing myself, living in a small apartment so I could send them $2,000 a month, denying myself things I wanted, and they saw me as a fool they could keep squeezing. The next day I went to the bank in person and filled out all the paperwork to dispute each one of those charges. Michael helped me with the whole process and told me the bank would probably rule in my favor because I had proof I hadn't authorized any of those purchases and that my family had used my information without permission. I also changed all my passwords, canceled those cards, got new ones, basically made sure they could never do this again. But obviously I had to confront them face to face. I went to my parents' house 2 days later. It was a Saturday afternoon. I arrived and my dad was in the yard mowing the lawn, my mom was in the kitchen, and Brandon was, where else? In the basement playing. I went in without knocking, he still had a key at that point, and my mom saw me and her face was like between surprise and fear. She knew I was angry. I sat at the kitchen table and said, Mom, call Dad and Brandon. We all need to talk. She tried to say something, but I just repeated, call them. Now. My dad came in like 2 minutes later, and Brandon took like 10 minutes, probably in the middle of a game. He couldn't pause, of course. When everyone was there, I took out a folder I had brought with all the statements printed, with each unauthorized charge marked with yellow highlighter. I showed them the total, $93,000, and said, this is what you guys spent on my credit card without my permission, $93,000. Do you have any idea how much money that is? My mom started again with the crying and the, well, Ethan, you've always helped us. We thought you wouldn't mind. Brandon, surprisingly, spoke up and said, I mean, bro, you make good money. What do you need it for? Us here struggling and you living comfortably in the city. I almost had a heart attack. I said, Brandon, you struggling? Struggling against what? Against getting to the next level? You don't work, you don't study, you don't do anything but play video games all day while mom brings food to your room and I pay for the roof over your head. My dad finally spoke and said, look, son, yes, we went overboard. Okay, we admit it. But it's not that bad. We'll pay you back little by little. And I'm like, no, Dad, you're not going to pay me back anything because you never have. In 5 years, you've never paid me back a single dollar of everything I've lent you. I already talked to the bank, and I'm going to dispute all these charges as fraud." My mom screamed, "Are you going to accuse us of fraud? Your own family?" And I said, "Mom, what you did is fraud. You literally took my credit card and spent almost $100,000 without my permission. That's a crime." She started saying I was a terrible son, that I was cruel, that I was going to regret it. Brandon said something like, "You always knew you weren't the favorite, and now it shows." That hurt, I'm not going to lie, but it also confirmed everything I'd always felt. I got up to leave, and before going out I said, "And another thing, I'm not going to keep sending you money every month anymore, not the $2,000 for the mortgage or anything. It's over. Get jobs, all three of you." And I left. My dad followed me to the car and tried to calm me down, "Please, Ethan, don't do this. Your mother didn't mean any harm." But I just started the car and left. The following weeks were chaos. The bank investigated everything, and 3 weeks later, Michael called to tell me they had ruled in my favor on all disputed charges. The $93,000 was going to be removed from my balance, and the bank was going to go after the people who made the purchases to recover the money. Basically, that meant my family now owed $93,000 to the bank, not to me. I blocked my mom and Brandon from my phone because they wouldn't stop sending me messages saying I was horrible, that I was ruining them, that how could I do this to them. My dad would call me from time to time, but I didn't answer. I needed space. I moved to a new apartment closer to downtown, farther from where they lived, and started my life over without them in it. About a month later, the debt collectors started. My cousin Rachel, who's the official family gossip, sent me a message. She was one of the few who still talked to me, saying Brandon was getting calls constantly from collection agencies and that my parents were too. Apparently, the bank had sold the debt to collectors, and now they wouldn't stop calling and sending letters. Rachel told me Brandon had to change his phone number because he was getting 30 calls a day. Part of me felt bad, but most of me thought, well, actions have consequences. Brandon eventually got a job, his first job in years, at a diner flipping burgers. My mom sent me a message from my dad's phone, because she was blocked, with a photo of Brandon in his work uniform saying, "Look what you forced your brother to do," as if working was a form of torture. I didn't even respond, but according to Rachel, Brandon lasted 2 weeks at that job before quitting because he said it was too tiring and his boss was mean to him. I mean, typical. My parents started falling behind on mortgage payments without my monthly help. 2 months later, my dad had to get an additional part-time job at Home Depot to try to cover expenses. My mom still wasn't working, but at least she stopped sending me guilt messages. I think she finally understood I wasn't going to give in. About 4 months into all this drama, one Sunday morning, someone rang the doorbell of my new apartment. It was early, 8 inches the morning, and I was still in pajamas drinking coffee. I looked through the peephole, and it was my parents. There was no way they knew my new address, unless they had literally followed me or something. They probably asked Rachel and she told them, because she's a gossip, but also has a good heart. I opened the door and my mom immediately started crying. My dad looked tired, really exhausted, like he had aged 5 years and 4 months. They asked if they could come in. I hesitated, but let them in. They sat on my couch and my mom said between sobs, "Ethan, please, we need your help. We're going to lose the house. We can't keep paying the mortgage without your help." I sat across from them and said, "And Brandon? Is he working?" My dad sighed and said he got a job at a warehouse 2 weeks ago, but the pay is very low, $9 an hour. I asked, "And the $93,000 you spent on cruises and TVs and PlayStations?" Silence. Finally, my dad said, "Look, we made a mistake, a big mistake, but please don't let us lose our house." And I, honestly, felt a moment of doubt, because they're my parents, you know? But then I remembered everything. Years of being used, Brandon living free while I sacrificed, my mom crying manipulation every time I set a boundary, the $50,000 cruise they wanted to take while I paid their mortgage, and I said no. I said no. I'm not going to help you with the house. You're going to have to sell or do whatever you have to do, but I'm no longer your financial backup plan. My mom said something like, "You're a monster. "You have no heart." But my dad just took her by the arm and led her out of the apartment. Before leaving, he looked at me and said in a tired voice, "It's okay, son. I understand." And they left. About 2 months later, Rachel told me my parents sold the house. They couldn't keep paying and decided to sell it before the bank took it. They moved to a small apartment about the size of mine in a not-so-great area of the city. Brandon went with them, obviously, because where else was he going to go? Rachel said, "The apartment has 2 bedrooms, and Brandon sleeps on the living room couch, and apparently he's super bitter about it. Tough luck." What happened next was almost comical in how predictable it was. The debt collectors took Brandon to court over the debt. He didn't show up to the first 2 hearings, probably thinking if he ignored them, they'd disappear, until a judge issued an order and basically forced him to go. The judge ruled against him and determined he owed the $93,000 plus like $20,000 in court fees and interest. Basically, Brandon now owes like $113,000 that he's never going to be able to pay in his life with warehouse jobs. They started garnishing his wages. Rachel sent me a screenshot. Brandon had posted on Facebook. Yes, he still uses Facebook. Complaining that now from his 2-week paycheck that was like $700, he only got like $200 because the rest went to the debt. And I can't help but think, well, Brandon, what did you expect? That you were going to be able to spend $100,000 on cruises and PlayStations and there would be no consequences? The last thing I heard, like 2 weeks ago, was that they repossessed Brandon's car. Rachel sent me a photo her friend had sent her of a tow truck taking Brandon's car from his work parking lot. Apparently, Brandon came out of his shift, and his car just wasn't there anymore. He had to call my dad to pick him up. Now he takes the bus to work, which according to Rachel is a tragedy of epic proportions according to Brandon, because the bus takes like an hour longer than by car. My mental response was, welcome to the world of normal people who can't afford cars. My parents are still in their small apartment. My dad still works his 2 jobs. My mom finally got a part-time job at a retail store. Nothing special, but at least something. Brandon is still at the warehouse making $9 an hour with most of his paycheck garnished, living on the living room couch of a 2-bedroom apartment with his parents at 25 years old. And me? Honestly, I'm better than ever. Without having to send $2,000 a month to my parents, I was able to save. And 2 months ago, I bought myself a new car, a 2023 Audi, a 4 that I love. I'm planning a trip to Japan for next year, something I always wanted to do but never could because all my extra money went to my family. I got a raise at work. Now I make like $105,000 a year, and I'm dating someone, a girl I met at a networking event. Her name is Jessica, and she's amazing. My dad calls me from time to time, like once a month, never asking for money, just like to see how I'm doing. I answer sometimes. Our relationship isn't what it was, but at least something exists. My mom is still blocked. I haven't talked to her since that morning at my apartment, and honestly, I don't feel like it. Brandon sent me a message from a new number like a month ago, saying he hated me, and that I had ruined his life. I blocked him without responding. Rachel says, Brandon tells everyone that I'm a terrible brother who abandoned his family, and I'm like, okay, let him think whatever he wants. Do I feel bad sometimes? Yes. I'm not going to lie. There are nights when I wonder if I was too harsh, if I should have handled things differently. But then I remember the $50,000 cruise. Brandon in the basement playing video games while I worked 2 jobs to help them. My mom crying, manipulation every time I said something. And I think, no, I did the right thing. I set boundaries I should have set years ago. I forced them to face consequences they always avoided. And if that makes me the bad guy in their minds, I can live with that. Last week, Jessica asked me about my family because I never talk about them. I told her an abbreviated version of this whole story, and she said something that, made me feel validated. She said, Ethan, what you did wasn't cruel. It was necessary. Sometimes people need to hit rock bottom to change. And she was right. My parents are working now, both of them, something they hadn't done together in years. Brandon has a job, and although he hates every second of it, it's better than being in a basement rotting away playing video games. They had to sell their house, yes, but they also had to grow up and face the reality that they can't live beyond their means, expecting me to cover everything. I guess at the end of the day, I learned that family doesn't get a free pass to treat you badly just because they're family. That it's okay to set boundaries, even if it means people are going to hate you. And that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to stop rescuing them and force them to save themselves. Does it still hurt when I think about everything? Of course. Do I regret what I did? No. Not at all. And if I could go back, the only thing I'd change is that I would have set those boundaries much, much earlier.